Academy!
Hello again, everybody, from the United States Border Patrol Academy. This is What's Important Now, the podcast from the United States Border Patrol Academy, where we talk about things that matter to the men and women of the United States Border Patrol, their family, and those we serve. And I got to tell you, one of the neatest aspects of this job, being the chief of the academy, is some of the people I get to meet and talk to. We have visitors that come through these gates all the time that just have amazing stories. They're amazing people in their own right, and today is no exception. We're blessed to have retired Chief of the United States Border Patrol, Michael J. Fisher, here with us today. He was just talking to Class 1160. Chief, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, sir.
So what do you think so far? It's been a few years since you've been back through these gates. How did it feel? A little nostalgia?
Extremely so, and it never gets old, no matter how frequent I would come when I was the chief, and even coming back now after a few years. It is just amazing the honor and the tribute that institutionally is kept and getting better each and every year, and certainly that's a testament to your leadership, Chief.
So most of us know who you are, but for the benefit of those that are listening that might not have been in the patrol or just joined us here recently, you're one of the longest serving chiefs of the United States Border Patrol for the better part of 6 years.
That's correct.
From 2010 to 2015.
The end of 15, yes.
And you actually joined the United States Border Patrol in 1987?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Class 208.
208.
And I know I asked you this before, but you did have a class chant. And did you have time to think about it, see if you could recall it?
I did, and I haven't.
That's okay. You're not alone in that. You're in good company. But in your class, in class 208, so we graduated class 1160 today, so we're pushing up on that 1,000 mark for you that comes through and graduates. You still keep in touch with some classmates?
I do. And I had to think about it because it's been a while since I've actually talked to a member of the class 208. Most of them, if not all of them, have since retired. But I can remember throughout my career watching my class, there were 6 of us who did not go to San Diego back in 1987. Pretty much everybody back then was being assigned to the San Diego sector. But there were 6 of us in the class that were really tight because we went to the Tucson sector. My roommate my tutor in Spanish as a native speaker. He and I went on and worked in Douglas. He went through the BORTAC selection as well. I'd known him for many years, and he's probably the last one that I somewhat talk with. He is also retired, and he's doing some work against bad people and bad things as well. So. But I still keep in touch with a few of them.
And, of course, you've stayed in orbit around the Border Patrol. You're a member of the Border Patrol Foundation's board.
That's correct.
And so it always amazes me. I think it's something that's really, really great that you have people that, even after retirement, this organization, this Green family, means so much to them that they don't separate from it. They stay in touch as best they can. And you volunteered your time to come up here and speak to Class 1160 along with Chief Gloria Chavez from the El Paso sector. You were her special guest. And I got to think it does something for you to be able to stay connected and see what this organization that you led for so long is becoming and will become.
Oh, absolutely. Even if I wanted to, I don't think I could just, wake up one day and forget how the organization and the mentors that I had shaped who I later became in my career. And for me, even when I retired, it's just something I just couldn't shut off. Matter of fact, when I started thinking about my next transition out of government, although I retired from government, I was transitioning into a private sector. I really thought long and hard about what I wanted to do. And one of the things that I felt strongly about was continuing to be able to give back to the organization somehow from the business standpoint. Although I was recruited to do other things with other companies and businesses, I really wanted to have the degree of flexibility to pick and choose those things which I believe were going to help support the men and women in the mission, which was the reason why I created Scorpion Security Services, because it gave me that freedom to be able to pick and choose and say no to things, regardless of the compensation, because I didn't believe whatever product or service that was available was going to be beneficial. So, and then certainly when the Border Patrol Foundation had asked if I would serve on the board, and I said, well, absolutely. And then they called back and said, oh yeah, by the way, our treasurer is leaving to get married, so we don't have a treasurer. Could you take on the treasury duties?
There's those numbers again.
There it is, and it was the biggest bait and switch that I've ever seen. But I was pleased to be able to do that as well, and I still honored to continue to serve the foundation as we continue to generate the resources that are required to help continue to support the Border Patrol families.
So I bring that up because your introduction to the Border Patrol is relatively commonplace. You have folks like us that come from not the border area and just happen to stumble across the Border Patrol. Tell that story. You told it last night, and I thought it was really neat.
So I was 23 years old. I was in college. I was just finishing up a 2-year internship with the district attorney's office. My goal in going into a pre-law criminal justice program in college was to go to law school. I spent 2 years, my junior and senior year, at a basement of the district attorney's office, writing case briefs, bored out of my mind, thinking, oh my gosh, here I am coming up towards the end of my college, and I don't want to be a lawyer, right? But I was reading a lot of police reports, and so I scrambled, had an interview. There was an FBI agent who came on campus, interviewed, and said, hey, did really good in the interview, but by the way, we're only hiring Chinese linguists and accounting majors. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And he said, well, just get into another federal law enforcement program. You can always transfer over. It's easier once you get in the federal system. So I did that. That was back in 1986. I sent out letters to every federal agency, U.S. Marshal Service, the Customs Service, DEA, whatever I could find in the local library. And then I graduated college, went home, and received a trifold in an envelope. It wasn't, thank you for wanting to serve the country. Thank you for your interest in the United States Border Patrol. It was just a trifold. And I would have normally thrown it out, but the front picture intrigued me. I saw what later was Border Patrol agents in uniform, green uniforms, on ATVs and horsebacks. And as I read the information, I automatically thought, well, this is something I would really enjoy doing. And since I didn't get anything else in the mail, I decided that I was going to take a shot and try to push out of my comfort zone and go into an area that was totally unfamiliar to me. I didn't have any exposure to a law enforcement community, not in the family, or not any friends. And so for me, it was kind of a leap of faith, if you will. And I just had a sense that this may be something worth trying.
And you went from that. You went from, you started when you were 23 years old. And so you went from being in Pittsburgh to receiving a trifold snail mail regular envelope, not email. This is back in,
Yes.
And you got that and thought it looked good, so you gave it a shot and you applied. To fast forward 30 years later, you're commanding this entire organization that's grown to about 25,000 employees, a budget of $3.5 billion. And I might add, during a pivotal time in our agency's development. We, coming on the heels of 9/11 and what CBP and the Department of Homeland Security would become, you played an integral role in all of that. What a twisted path life has dealt, right?
Oh, clearly. And it's only upon reflection in the way that you put it, does anybody realize that? Because, and you can appreciate this, what you're doing in the moment within the patrol, regardless of if you're a frontline agent patrolling the river, or if you're hiking in the mountains, or you're a first line supervisor, or agent in charge, chief in the field, or chief of the Border Patrol, you're not thinking about the enormity at times of what the challenges are. It's probably a defense mechanism, because had I known as I was going up that that's what I would have had to confront, I would have slowed it down or said no to a lot of things that I ended up saying yes to, because for me, it was a challenge, and I was honored to even be asked, even though at the time I believed that I was not ready for that next promotion, or I wasn't the person best suited to do X, Y, or Z. It was those who perhaps recognized that I was ready for a position that I myself found very difficult to comprehend or accept. But when you're doing that, and you're recognizing the day-to-day importance of the mission and protecting this country and protecting the men and women, you really don't have time to think about how it affects you, or you just have to be able to recognize that there are a lot of people counting on you. And so for me, it was kind of a sense of importance, and I just wished each and every day when I was putting on my uniform that I would make the decisions and not let them down to be able to continue the great tradition of this organization.
So I'll tell you a little secret. I don't think that you and I have talked about this before. I went through BORTAC Class 15. You were Class 5. So I very definitely knew who you were coming up in the organization. But the first time I actually met you was in Tucson Sector when we were doing the very first Operation Desert Risk, which turned into ABCI. And you were an assistant chief under David Aguilar.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent, my team spent the entire summer out there at the base of Abakivri and working in cells on the Tohono O'odham Reservation. And that was my first introduction to you. And I remember, it struck me how articulate and intelligent you were. So it was no surprise to a lot of us that you went on to lead the organization. And I want to talk about what resulted from that in a second. But before we get there, I want to talk about your time with the Border Patrol Tactical Unit, because you also joined that unit at a time when it was still a fledgling group. You were Class 5 that went through in 1990. It started in 1984. And you actually, during the war on drugs in the Reagan era, and it was carried over, you deployed to South America and did a lot of counter-narcotics operations that I don't think a lot of people know the Border Patrol, and specifically BORTAC, participated in. Can you talk a little bit about what that entailed?
Sure. It was interesting, too, to show you how, some things perhaps change very slowly in this organization. At the time, I was stationed at the Douglas Station, and I had gone through the SRT program, Special Response Team program, in the Tucson sector. And the cadre that trained me in that sector were agents like Charlie Whitmire and Jeff Calhoun and Ron Colburn. And they had just gone through BORTAC 4. And they came up to me, Ron Colburn was in BORTAC 1. And so Charlie came up to me, I remember, and said, "Hey, did you put in for BORTAC?" And I said, "Well, what is that?" He said, "Well, the memo's been out for months now." And I said, "Well, the PIC doesn't post a memo, so I don't know anything about it." He said, "I'm going to send you one. You only have a couple of days to test because the testing's coming to an end." And so here I was. I had no idea what the unit was. He said, "You'll be good for the unit." And based on my respect for Charlie Whitmire at the time and the fact that I'd be able to continue my training in special operations, I put a memo in, and a day later I did the PT test, I did the firearms qual, I did the prerequisites for it, and then went on to the unit. It was a really eye-opening experience for me. It pushed me beyond physical and mental limits, more so than I had encountered any time, either up until the point and including what I had to push through at the academy. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about tactics, techniques, and procedures, and I knew that I still had a whole lot more to learn. And so for me, that opened up opportunities. You had mentioned the Operation Snowcap, Operation Cadence in South America. During the war on drugs, the United States was committed to help our foreign partners reduce the flow of cocaine into the United States. So we were deployed in the Chapari area, base camp in Bolivia for a while, working with the National Police, the UMAPAR, to be able to identify, locate, and destroy cocaine labs, base labs, airstrips. And that was a rotation we did. I also had the opportunity after the Civil War ended in El Salvador. They needed to regroup with their government. They needed to reestablish a new national police force. So we were asked to come down for a year on multiple deployments and basically do a basic training for the new police force that was going to be made up of former guerrillas, former military in El Salvador, and former police officers. And so that was interesting. We talked about language proficiency before, right? So it was the first time where I really had to up my game as it related to Spanish proficiency beyond what I was already doing within the Border Patrol, because now, as one of the lead instructors, and team leaders for the teams going down. We had to develop on our own the curriculum. We had to do the translation in the Spanish. And we had to teach the course in Spanish, and so that put me in a very uncomfortable position, which in hindsight, as we had discussed with the class this morning, was probably one of the better opportunities that I had as well. And there's a lot of other missions that I had the opportunity to go on. But what I remember most of the Border Patrol agents and the BORTAC agents that I had trained with, I had deployed with, in every situation. We talked with the agents this morning about how important it is to maintain their proficiencies at all level, never become complacent, because at the end of the day, it's only them and their partners. And the Border Patrol agents, oftentimes, in these situations, it's the only thing that they can rely on. And it's so true, and you know this from being in BORTAC and BORSTAR. There's a degree of bonding that lasts beyond the uniform, right? I mean, there are BORTAC agents that I have worked with that still we email on a frequent basis. We still talk about and joke and laugh about, and tell lies about what we did and how great we were. So that's part of the tradition as well, and that's something that keeps me going.
Well, and then fast forward to today. So today we have the Special Operations Group that encompasses not only the BORTAC unit, but the Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Team, BORSTAR, and a little team you might be familiar with called the Mobile Response Team.
Right.
I believe you had just a little bit to do with that coming into existence as well.
There was a lot of agents where we were trying to solve a very challenging problem in San Diego, and the Mobile Response Team was born out of a session that we needed to solve a problem, and it was created specifically for that reason.
And I can tell you that is, for me, one of the neatest teams that the Border Patrol has, because it is just good, hard-charging Border Patrol agents that want to be where the action is all the time and will get out there and work the long hours and do the job. When I was the patrol agent in charge of SOD, the Special Operations Detachment in the Rio Grande Valley, I would say I came to depend on that team more than any other, because they were out there. They were seizing narcotics. They were arresting people just right and left, and became very fond of it. And today that team has grown to multiple sectors along the southwest border and on the northern border as well. And in my mind, are some of the most dedicated agents out there.
Well, the other thing it did for me, Chief, and this was a conscious decision when we stood up the team, is I always wanted to provide, wherever my command was, I always wanted to provide opportunities that not everybody would gravitate to, but a small percentage would need in their careers. And if those opportunities weren't provided, those that were destined, although they didn't know it at the time, destined for leadership. And if you didn't provide them those areas to push through their comfort zone, nobody else would. And so not only did a unit like the MRT, as an example, solve a tactical problem and an operational gap that we had at the time at the sector, it also provided a mechanism for other aspiring agents to look up and say, someday I want to be able to do that. But I think BORTAC, today still does the same thing. It's not for everybody. It was not supposed to be for everybody, but for those experiences and those agents who have gone through those experiences and now are in leadership positions, I think in many respects, when I look back on it, without those experiences, I don't know that I would have ever promoted through the organization the way that I did, because it was those opportunities and people that believed in me.
And thank goodness for those experiences, because you were kind of thrust into these leadership roles, especially after 9/11 and when CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, our parent organization, was stood up. You became the Deputy Director of the Office of Anti-Terrorism.
Right.
From the field. They pulled you up, and you helped stand that office up for CBP, and of course it morphed into several other things down the road and has continued to grow. And then you were called up by Chief David Aguilar at the time, who was going to be the acting deputy commissioner, for you, as you said earlier, to mind the store, so to speak.
Yeah.
Talk about that, because I laughed whenever you were when you were telling what your expectations were and what it turned into.
Right. So before I get to there, I have to actually take a couple of steps back, because I don't know that you and I have ever discussed this. When I tell people towards the latter part of my career, I think the last 4 or 5 positions that I held in the Border Patrol, I never put in for. Right. I was told you're going to be here and there, and the first time it ever happened, it was a shock to me. I was in Washington D.C. Again, this was probably on my return back from the Office of Anti-Terrorism. While I was there, I was selected as a division chief for the intelligence. And so the Border Patrol, because they were building a command and control, was building a whole new organization. So we were going from less than 50 FTEs to over 200 FTEs, and we had to operationalize that while these threats were happening. And as it turned out, I was in charge of the intelligence section. And so one day, the deputy chief at the Border Patrol called me in his office and says, "Hey, I just want to let you know that the chief wants to congratulate you this afternoon for putting in for the deputy chief in San Diego." Now, I've been in the Border Patrol long enough at that point to realize there's somebody messed up, man, because I didn't put in for the Border Patrol deputy chief in San Diego. I'm just starting this new thing in Washington, D.C., and so I was like, "Oh, this is going to be an embarrassment. How would I tell the chief?" And so I told the deputy. I said, "Sir, there's got to be a mistake. Just so you know, I didn't put in for the deputy chief in San Diego." And I expected him to say, "Oh, thanks for telling me. We'll keep this off the chief's radar. I'll get to the bottom of this. Go back to your intel, and we'll talk later." But without missing a beat, he looks across his table and he looks right in my eyes and he said, "Mike, you're at the point of your career where these decisions are taken out of your hands. Do you understand that?" And at that point, I
do
said,
now.
"Yes, sir." And as I'm walking back to my office in Washington, I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to tell my wife that I'm interviewing for a position and I didn't discuss it with her beforehand? And then I figured, I'll never get the position, right? I don't even know who the chief patrol agent is. So that was one. But it was in 2009 on Christmas Day. Remember it vividly. I was in the car. I was driving with the family. I get a call from David Aguilar. He was the chief of the Border Patrol at the time. And I remembered seeing earlier where Abdul Muttalib was coming in final approach in Detroit, and he tried to light himself on fire. Interestingly enough, CBP and DHS had targeted him as a potential terrorist. He was flagged. All the protocols were put in place for the counterterrorism secondary within CBP. The FBI was notified. Everybody was waiting for this plane to land. At the time, that was the threat stream. That was the method of operations. That's what the government was ready to absorb. And all of a sudden, they realized there was a security gap. The intent and capability had changed. There were some leadership changes, and on that Christmas Day, David explained to me that I'm going to be moving down to the front office as the acting deputy commissioner. I need you to come up as a chief, and I don't remember the words exactly. My impression when I hung up the phone with him, it was like on a Thursday, Friday, I had to be there the next Monday, was until they get this sorted out, since he has to move down to the 4th floor, he needs somebody to step in on the 6th floor. And I said yes. I've never said no to anything in the Border Patrol. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying I just never said no to anything. And I was there probably 30 days until I realized in a discussion with David on a separate subject that I was in fact designated as a new chief of the Border Patrol, and I was up there on a temporary assignment because of the current threat to the country, and they were in the process of setting my EOD for being the next chief of the Border Patrol.
And you had no idea.
I had no idea. And at that point, I realized that if I told him what I'm telling you now, they would have changed their mind because this guy was so stupid, right? He's coming up here, and how could he not know that this was permanent? So I immediately changed my whole thought process. I've been in acting positions before, and I knew it was going to be short term. Again, not knowing I was going to be the permanent, but I really just wanted to manage and just try to hand off something that wasn't broken to the new chief coming in. That was my intent. Well, when I found out about a month later, in February-March time period, that I was going to be the chief, and my entry on duty was set for May, I had to really start thinking about what I was going to be doing day in and day out. And so for me, it was just, I don't know that I would call it serendipity, or if I would call it, it's just one of those things that happens. I couldn't control it. David couldn't control it. The commissioner couldn't control it. And the last thing I ever wanted to do in a situation where the Border Patrol is facing challenging times in areas where you can tell that nobody's really sure what to do. I mean, these threats, as they were migrating, you could just see the fear and panic on people's faces, leaders' faces, because they were faced with something that they really weren't sure what to do for the first time in their professional career. When they ask for your help, there's no way that you can say no, right? You have to be part of that, regardless of what the outcome. And for me, again, as I look back on it, it provided another opportunity to forget about, how it was going to affect me, how it was going to affect my career, whether I was the right person for the job. The mission was set. I accepted it, and so I had to retrain my brain to start thinking about what we needed to do at the institutional level.
And so you're talking, just for everybody that knows, so you talk about the 6th floor versus the 4th floor. You're talking about the Ronald Reagan building, which is the headquarters for the United States Border Patrol, right, and indeed CBP. And so had no idea, and there you sit as the chief of the Border Patrol. And you said something last night, again, made me laugh. You said, I got asked all the time by people, how do I become the chief of the Border Patrol? You said, I have no idea. It just happened.
Yeah, it's the truth. And it was something, and I don't regret 1 minute of the leadership opportunities that the Border Patrol provided. But, for the first 10 years, I was having a blast being a Border Patrol agent and doing special operations. Matter of fact, I did not aspire to be a supervisor. I didn't aspire to be the chief. Matter of fact, my encounters with the chief patrol agent in any sector was so minimal. I knew they existed. I barely ever saw them, the first 5 years of my career. I saw the deputy chief a couple of times. That's a different story. It wasn't my fault still.
That's right.
But I didn't aspire because I didn't know enough about those positions. I was still learning in my own mind how I could better be a Border Patrol agent. And so there was not this, charting of career paths and thinking things through. It was swept up. I'll give you another good example. I was a field operations supervisor for the Border Patrol Tactical Unit. I wanted to get back to the field. I wanted to get back as an FOS to Tucson or some large sector. And lo and behold, the commander of the BORTAC unit became the chief in Detroit. And he had called me one day, and he said, hey, listen, I want you to put in for the deputy chief in Detroit. I said, sir, with all due respect, I want to get back to the southern border. He said, have you ever interviewed for a position in the Border Patrol before? When I thought about it, and I said, no. He said, I want you to put in, because I want to get you the experience to interview for a position in the Border Patrol. You have to be able to at least go through that once. You're not the forerunner on the selection. Matter of fact, I have an idea on who that person is going to be, but I'm giving you an opportunity to interview. I said, well, in that case, okay.
Sounds like a bait and switch to me.
I put in for the position, didn't tell my family. I told him this story. I said, by the way, I'm just going up for the interview. I'm not the front runner. The former commander's giving me an opportunity to interview. So I fly up to Detroit. There's a panel interview at the time. This was in 1998. You had the chief of Detroit. You had the deputy director under the old INS structure, and you had a representative from headquarters Border Patrol. Did a panel interview. I studied, short-term memory stuff, statistics about, the sector, and gave them my, leadership philosophy, all the responses typically that one would go through in that interview. Got on a plane the next day, flew back to BORTAC. 3 days later, I was on the shooting range. We were getting ready to do a LETC class, a law enforcement technical class, or LETAC, I'm sorry, for state and locals. And we're going through the courses that we were going to run. It said, "Hey, Chief, you got a call," before cell phones. So I ran back to the barracks, picked up the phone. "Hey, sir, how are you? Hey, congratulations. You're now my new deputy. I need you here next week." Another one of those instances where I just didn't learn, right? And now, not only do I have to try to scramble, I've got to now tell my family that I did in fact go to it, and it's not anywhere close to where they wanted to go. It's actually going to be in Detroit. And so, and every one of those stories, like I said, had put me in a position to overcome a lot of different adversity, not just in, I don't know anything about the northern border operations, right? Or from a family perspective. So now what do you do when your family says, "Well, we don't want to go to DC," or "You promised us, we were going to stay in San Diego," or you did all that things. Kind of like what we were discussing with the class, everybody throughout their career is going to make decisions. And throughout, in every decision that you make, there's going to be consequences for that. I don't have any regrets for the decisions that I've made. And as you have gone through, the more you promote that level of responsibility and those decisions that you make, the more impactful they are to you from a professional and a personal standpoint. And that's something that I want to continue to give to the organization. And I'm here talking to you about it as well. So it's important.
Well, and that makes a great dovetail into this next piece, because we saw the organization, we saw the United States Border Patrol mature and grow over the last 20 years. It was already, for all of us in here, was a great organization and always has been. But the environment changed, the threat changed, and so we had to change as well. And so in addition to just growing in general, our mission set grew. And I think back to when I joined, and we talked about this before, you had Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Rio Grande, Operation Hold the Line, and a lot of those basically were focused on the forward deployment, the static positions, the deter people from wanting to illegally cross the border in the first place. But really, in my mind, was the first stab at a comprehensive, coherent strategy by an agency. And that was carried forward and by leaps and bounds by David Aguilar in 2004 when he came up with what we referred to as the resource-based philosophy, which was the right combination of personnel, technology, and infrastructure. And I believe the Border Patrol doubled in size during that time. And fast forward, under your command, you took it a notch further and came up with the risk-based philosophy, which was the Border Patrol strategy for 2012 to 2016. And therein we started seeing targeted enforcement, going after those that are responsible for the flow of illicit traffic across the border, not just the conventional side where we are interdicting the traffic coming across. That's a huge leap from here to there, and it really showed the maturity of the Border Patrol by thinking strategically and coming up with how we're going to approach the border environment and the threats that exist for years to come. Talk about that evolution and your involvement in it.
I had the opportunity, again, in the 2004-05 time period, as we were developing the strategy, that resource-based strategy, to sit around and say, okay, so, how should we develop, which should be the pillars of the strategy? And I remember to this day the mission, as described in the strategy: gain, maintain, and expand operational control, utilizing the right combination of personnel, technology, and infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Verbatim, if you didn't know it, we provided cards for Border Patrol agents to keep in their pocket, because we were going to continually make sure that everybody understood what that was. There were a couple of challenges with that, which we didn't recognize until later. It was always control of the border. And then when people outside the organization were defining what control meant, it was different than what we had intended it to mean. And so to differentiate from everybody else describing it as either sealing the border or, well, how do you know when the border is going to be controlled, we came up with operational control, as if to suggest that's our definition, and we're going to go ahead and define that and measure the extent to which we believe we're successful on our terms, and everybody else could argue whether that was right or not. And it was new about how we were going to do that, and I really wasn't sure. I at that point I was transitioning. after the strategy was sent out to the field, I really didn't see a lot of the implementation, what the sectors did in response to the national strategy. When I went up back to San Diego as the deputy and then the chief shortly thereafter, I had the opportunity to not only visit the field and talk with Border Patrol agents in San Diego, but I traveled to San Diego or to Tucson Sector and Yuma Sector, and I wanted to see, and everywhere I would go, Border Patrol agents were standing in what was called then the X. So the implementation in some locations, and a lot of locations, ended up Border Patrol agents sitting in a fixed location for 8 to 10 periods without moving. And somehow the strategy and the implementation was, we're going to deter people by our mere presence, right? And as I look at it over the last few years, even when it started, you had mentioned, El Paso and Operation Gatekeeper, Hold the Line, and Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego. We didn't deter anybody. We just pushed the traffic somewhere else.
Right.
And so then I started thinking about, well, it's really great to use a term like deterrence. But what I would also, when we were looking at doing operations in San Diego at the strategic level, I said, if you're going to have a strategic objective or you're going to have a goal, it has to meet 3 criteria. First and foremost, it has to be actionable. You have to be able to describe it so somebody can actually do it and implement it. The second thing, it has to be measurable. Because if it's not measurable, there's no way to know whether or not you are succeeding. And I said the third criteria, it has to be sustainable. So whether it's a funding issue, whether it's a personnel issue. So if we're going to set up, and what we did in 2004, we set up that we're going to, deterrence was our objective. And it didn't meet any 3 of the criteria, nor did we define it philosophically to the field. And so they were left to their own devices, and they said, okay, we're going to stop people here. Independent of the fact that in some of those locations, Border Patrol agents were watching as groups were going around them, and they were confident that somebody behind them in a defense in-depth posture was going to make the apprehension. And so this was built a couple of years, and it really hit home to me where we needed a strategic shift. Even before I started thinking about, I'm the chief now, what am I going to do? And when I was the chief in San Diego, and by the way, when I was assigned to San Diego from Intel, from headquarters, it was basically, hey, Chief, we're focused in Arizona. We're going to send you out to San Diego. San Diego has all the resources. It has the technology. It has the personnel. It has the most infrastructure in terms of fence and roads. They were basically saying, Chief, we spent all this time fixing San Diego. We're sending you out there. Just don't screw it up, right? So it was low risk to them. Just go out there. You got 60 miles of border and go with it. I said, okay. So I was out there in San Diego. And then, as you well know, at the end of each operational year, that the chiefs at the time would have to get together at a chiefs conference, and we would have to brief our area of operation about how we were doing. And back then, and still today to a large extent, in my opinion, the litmus test for success was apprehensions, right? And it just so happened, and I believe it was in 2008, I could be wrong on that, that all across the southwest border, the apprehensions, as compared to the previous fiscal year, were trending down, right? Except for one sector, and that was in San Diego. And so as a new chief, having to go to my first chief's conference, I was getting calls like you used to get, when you did bad on your 6.5 or 10. Uh-huh. It's like, man, I really feel bad. What size shoe do you wear? Right? So I was getting these calls because I was the new chief, and they're saying, hey, you're the only one that is doing bad, right? Because your apprehensions are down. You're going to have to brief this. We're with you in spirit, right? Click. So I'm trying to figure out, well, what do I do now? How important is this? I mean, it can't be the end all to border security. And so I thought about it. And so it was my turn to brief. Get up on stage. All the slides are up. And all the slides, by the way, there were standard slides. Everybody got the same type of 5 slides. But the last slide at the end was, how do you assess what you did? Kind of grade your own homework. And And I had learned through that 2004, I had seen the implementation. I had started listening to the internal and external communications. And so when it came to me, and the slide went up, and you saw the chart with the apprehensions, just spike in San Diego in that 1 year. And it just so happened to coincide with the time I got there to the next year. Everything was going good. Fisher gets there and it goes up, right? And so you can almost hear the hush in the room. And so I go through this and this, this and this, and the last, and so here's the data. Here are the facts: deployments, personnel numbers, trends and flows, and our apprehensions are up. And so the chief at the time, David, asked me, he said, and Chief, what do you attribute the increase in apprehensions? And the only thing that I had prepped for that made sense to me, that the institution would understand as a young chief, I said, sir, the men and women of the San Diego sector have implemented the national strategy and have used the right combination of personnel, technology, and infrastructure to achieve operational control as measured by our increase in apprehensions, which caused our ability to increase more of those that cross through our sector, increasing our effectiveness. And he said, okay, any questions? And I sat down, and I had no idea what had just happened. And I thought about it, because I, in preparation for that, I had to figure out how we were going to, in San Diego, how we were going to describe success. And because we were tracking and we were looking at different variables other than apprehensions. The next year, what do you think happened? Our apprehensions went down. And so now I did the same thing, went through the slides. Chief, what do you attribute a reduction in your apprehensions this year to the previous year of increase in apprehensions? And not to be a smart aleck about it, but with sincerity, I said, Chief, the men and women of the San Diego Sector Border Patrol applied the right combination of personnel, technology, and infrastructure, achieving operational control as defined by a lack of throughput in traffic, resulting in a reduction in apprehensions. Which was true. The facts bore that out, by the way. This wasn't a smoke and mirrors. And the chief said, okay, anybody have any questions? It was at that point when nobody questioned me, where I realized as an organization, if we have an indicator for success, and only one indicator for success, and we can articulate that if it either goes up or if it goes down, it's success, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
There's no way that we can continue to try to, let alone convince others, convince ourselves that we know what we're doing when it relates to it. Because if we can't measure the extent to which we're successful in a national security mission, and then nobody else is going to do that. So we need to really rethink how we're looking at doing border security, which was part of the reason for the shift in that strategy. And the reason why we shifted our GEPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act, which historically had been apprehensions ever since I came in the Border Patrol. We shifted that and we changed it to the interdiction effectiveness ratio, which was one indicator of 12 that matched the new ways that we were going to answer that question and measure it. And no more was it just going to be up to somebody's intuition on whether they thought the border was secure or not.
So let me just break it down for the layperson there. We had never, as an agency, even thought about how we measured whether or not we were doing a good job. Mm-hmm. And your example shows that we could say we were doing a good job whether the arrests were up or whether they were down, because we had never really given it much thought. And so we're trying to hone in on how are we telling the American people if we're doing a good job or not. And that's where this next evolution, this interdiction effectiveness ratio, and leading into the risk-based philosophy, kind of started to take us in that direction.
No, you're absolutely right. And as we started, broadening the discussion, first internally within the organization, it's been my experience that when you're going to make a strategic shift or make an impactful change into something that an organization has done for a very long time, you're going to get a lot of resistance because of the fear of change, right? That comfort area. And so the first thing I needed to do was just have this conversation with peers of mine, other chiefs, and have a real honest discussion about we need to do better as an organization, as a group. And all of you that were around that table at the time had to be honest with ourselves that we could not continue down the road that we were. And we really needed to think through some hard problems and really come up with the best way to describe what a secure border was. Because simultaneously, when I was queuing the oversight committees, that we were doing a strategic shift, and I wanted their input, and also I wanted them time to absorb the fact that we were in the process of redoing a national security strategy. This was something we as an organization just couldn't change overnight. And you needed to be able to work with those groups and their staffs to have these conversations and kind of grow it so they become comfortable over time. And the other thing that we did is we brought in members of industry. We brought in members of community groups to sit in strategic sessions and think these things through to help alleviate the shock of change that they were about to see, whether it was a sheriff in the field who's used to seeing Border Patrol agents standing, at the post all the time, or a rancher who was used to having Border Patrol agents posted in their backyard. All of that was going to change. And so as we're going through this honest assessment, and by the way, I had asked the team to really think about how we were going to define a secure border. I also recognized that I needed Congress, because at the time they were still dabbling back and forth on comprehensive immigration reform. I think the summer of 2010, we received our last supplemental, and I think 13 was kind of the shortest period, the last-ditch effort for them to do that. They would not or could not define what a secure border looked like. And so we got to the point where we were going to implement the new strategy. We'd done all this internal messaging. We were getting buy-in, and so we identified it. And one of the key pieces that we did, because it's not just one thing, right? People want to just make it very simplistic. People didn't want to let go of apprehensions. And I used to use this analogy when I would go to musters. And one of the congressional testimonies that I did, this was after a GAO audit. And I remember the auditor and during the hearing, and I was friends with him. I didn't always agree with his recommendations, but for the most part, he was fair. And he said one thing at the hearing about the organization. This was early, like one of the first congressional testimonies that I did, where apprehensions was still, the hen that laid the golden egg. Everybody was just, well, what are your apps this year? Are they up or are they down, right? And he had been studying the Border Patrol and doing assessments for a while. And he said at this hearing, I think it was the House Homeland Subcommittee, Maritime and Border Security, and the hearing was about how do you measure border security. Matter of fact, the chairwoman at the time asked me what I wanted the hearing to be about, and I said, I want it to be about this. I want to open up a broader discussion. And so the hearing was about how do you determine the extent to which the border is secure. And so this GAO guy said, and he looks at me, there's two of us on the panel. And he looks at me and he says, Chief, he said, the Border Patrol is like, I'm asking for your batting average and you're just giving me your hits. The Border Patrol, Chief, I need more than your hits. I need your at-bats. And then, then the question then went on. And I started thinking about that. And I'm thinking, what does this baseball analogy have to do with the problems that we're trying to solve? And it dawned on me that we were just telling people how many people we apprehended, how much narcotics we seized.
Not how many that got away.
Had nothing to do with the volume or the threat. It was, and when we started, talking about why the threat, we had to really focus on a risk-based approach, is because you couldn't be everywhere at all times. Then how then were we going to prioritize areas that we were going to focus and areas that we're not going to focus? And it wasn't just about the geography. And geez, don't these transnational criminal organizations now teamed up with potential terrorist groups, as the July 2011 National Security Report suggested? We need to start thinking about these smugglers not as mom and pops when we came in the patrol that are just doing it locally. This is organization. They're running us like a business, and we have to change the way that we're going to attack this problem, or we're never going to win. And so when I started trying to explain, so how do I bring this to the workforce? So I started the messaging, and I would talk with Border Patrol agents, the leadership, and we kind of go through this, and they're like, okay, yeah, I understand that. They said, well, what does it have to do with border security? I said, let me tell you a quick story. When I played college football, I was a running back, and I had a head coach who just never liked to throw the ball. I mean, all he did 95, 98% of the time was run the ball. So much so that the teams that we played had scouted us so much that they always put 8 to 9 players on defense in the box, which meant at any given time, there's at least 2 or 3 defensive players who are left unblocked, and they're just killing me every play. And so game after game, and obviously you can imagine with a philosophy like that, it just, even back in the 80s, that wasn't a really good philosophy. So I felt bold one practice, and I went up to him and I said, Coach, listen, I'm getting killed. I said, why don't we throw the ball? And I remember his remark, and obviously this wasn't a teaching moment for Fisher. He grabs my face mask and he pulls me close and he says to me, and he's spitting through my face mask, Fisher, there's 3 things that happen when you pass the ball, and 2 are bad. Now get back into the huddle. And he pushes me back. And I had no idea what that meant. So then I'm starting to think about it later. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, well, I understand that, right? And then it dawned on me, this was something that, when you're sitting around trying to figure out how you pull together the smart people for a strategy, I started telling Border Patrol agents, I said, you know what? I said, there are generally only 3 outcomes when anybody comes across this border illegally, right? One is they're going to be apprehended, and that's a good thing. The number 2, they're going to come across, and they're going to realize for whatever reason they're not going to make it. And they're going to turn around, and they're going to go back into Mexico. And that, too, from our standpoint, is a good thing. Remember the new CBP mission? Remember our 2012, what we're trying to shift to? That is no threat by somebody coming in, right? Well, Chief, what about deterrence? And I said, first of all, you can't have a strategy or a mission objective. I talked about the criteria before, because how do you know if you achieve it? How do you count? How many people did you deter this past year? I have no idea. Well, it's easy if there's a person standing 1 foot across the international boundary and you're observing them. Now you don't know for certainty, but there's probably a good chance that person is going to wait for you to leave because their intent is to cross the United States. Because when you look at deterring somebody, what you're basically trying to do is know exactly what their intent is and their capability, and then you're going to assume that they're going to cross into the United States. And with that example, close to the border, I could probably get away with that. So how far back am I now going to start claiming deterrence? Right? If somebody is 10 feet from the border, can I still infer that they're probably going to come in, and in my end of the shift report, can I claim 1 person deterred? What about 25 feet? You see where you go. At what point are then you collecting quote unquote data? It's an unattainable objective in my opinion. So you don't attain. Now you can do it as a byproduct if you're extremely, extremely successful in specific areas. And we see that today in some of these border areas where you have primary fence, you have systems that are on the border that will let you know even on the approach when people are coming. And so the smuggling organizations as a business have decided it's too costly, we're not going to cross here. And so you have really deterred them from crossing in that area, not crossing the whole border. So it does make some sense from a strategic standpoint, but you can't hold it up as an objective. And the third outcome of somebody attempting to come into the United States is that they get away from us, right? Either we see them or we don't see them, but they ultimately get away from us. And so those are the 3. And if there was a way that we could, to the best of our ability, right? The message was we cannot make perfect the enemy of good here. In the absence of any other alternative that makes sense outside of the current status quo, which we all agreed, by the way, at some point, collectively, that apprehensions in and of itself were not serving the interests of not only the organization's interest, but the national security interest. And we were then going to embark on something new with these 12 risk indicators and metrics, one of which the interdiction effectiveness rate. Then we needed to internally, because to this day, I would put my money on Border Patrol agents trained to the best of their ability to tell me how many people came in last night, and of that number, how many were arrested, how many were turned back, and how many got away. Recognizing the fact that if somebody got away, nobody was going to be demoted. There was not going to be disciplinary action, because if you do that, no one's going to report it, right? And it was kind of like the snickering about, well, yeah, we didn't have anybody come through this area because our golf numbers, our got-away numbers were way too high, right? You have to be able to trust the people. You have to be able to support them. And until you know the extent of the problem, you have to be able to collect the data and take a look at it.
And so this would be a common problem for any law enforcement organization.
Oh, absolutely.
If you had a municipal police department, they may have a large number of DUI arrests, but their objective is not to see how many arrests they make. It's to try and keep the community safe by bringing the number of drunk drivers on the street down.
Right.
Well, if you're not even measuring that or capturing that or tracking that, how do you know if you're successful or not? And that's essentially what we were faced with. And you can draw the same conclusion here. Our apprehensions right now are through the roof compared to what they have been in times past. Well, does that mean that we're securing the border? Or does that mean there's some other dynamic at play that's simply driving that particular factor, that variable, up?
Sure.
So that's been the conundrum. It's a very complex environment, the border environment, and how we define how good a job we do at border security and how that applies to national security. And so you played a very big role in that aspect of it, and it's still an evolution process today, I would say. Mm-hmm. You also did something else where you, as I said before, went to targeting those that are responsible, as well as doing the conventional interdiction frontline operations. Right. And that's where the corridors and the Joint Task Force West, they were actually born off of this concept. And that was another evolution for the Border Patrol, because we were not just out on patrol in green and whites anymore. We were partnering with investigative partners. We were mapping and identifying the network, our adversary, and doing what we could to disrupt, degrade, and dismantle the organization as a business, as you said. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that and how that morphed into part of our mission.
When I look back on it, there were certain periods throughout my career where there was a forcing function that made me stop admiring a problem too long and forced me to make a decision and move and act. And what had happened, and I remember vividly, it was in 2010. Now remember, we're still thinking about strategy. We're thinking about these, metrics and everything. And I remember walking in, new commissioner at the time, Alan Burson. There's a staff meeting. You've been in the commissioner's conference room around the fourth floor. Long table, very executive. All the assistant commissioners around, all the backbenchers. And here the commissioner is going to lay out his vision, intent for CBP for the coming year, for 2011. And he comes in, and everybody's waiting, right? There's been no leaks. What part am I going to play, and everything else. And I remember he looks at everybody, he pounds the table, and he said, CBP has two priorities this year. We're going to fix Arizona, and the Border Patrol is going to tell us where the next Arizona is going to be when it moves. And everybody looked around, and so and then the staff meeting continued with other business, and then the question was like, well, how are we going to fix Arizona? What does that even mean, right? Because up until that in 2011, you remember, they had been entrenched for 10 years, and they weren't moving. Matter of fact, they were setting up shop in the West Desert, and it was one of the hardest areas, organizations we've been able to unroot. Somebody. Well, just do what you did, in San Diego. Totally different. 60 miles of border versus 260 miles of border, right? How do you, the terrain's different. I mean, it's not that simplistic for those outside the organization. And so we had two challenges in front of us. One was fixing Arizona. So then we worked to define specifically what that meant for the commissioner and how we were going to execute against that and the timeline that it was given. But the one that really was troubling me was, how do we predict the next one? I mean, our organization, if nothing else, has been very good at responding after the fact. Mm-hmm. I mean, we got, remember when we had to shift resources from one to the other, and we had this, I used to call it with the leadership, the firehouse mentality. There's nobody more ready, willing, and able. So when that alarm goes off, we're going to respond to that area and put the fire out. Now we're being asked to prevent the fire. And not only that, to tell us where the next fire is going to be and to prevent it. And so we started thinking around. And so I remember, what I do when I'm going through a challenging problem definition, problem solving exercise, I just leave it to the smart people in the organization. And I said, okay, I want this group to do this, and I want you guys to come back to me with one slide that's going to convince me using hard data. I don't want your gut feelings. I don't want, I think this is going to happen. I want some, because if you explain to me where it's going to go, be able to back it up. And I want to see the data, and I want the methodology that you're using in your interpretation and the analysis of the data to convince me that where you say the traffic's going to go next year is going to be right. And they all went off. And the three different groups, working independently, because I didn't want any cross-pollination, right, came back to me, and these charts and graphs were like, and I gave them, I think, like 30 days. I wanted to give them enough time, but we couldn't admire this problem for like 6 months, right? This was something we couldn't outsource, even if we could afford it, because it was too complex, and nobody could have really thought about this than the smart Border Patrol agents. And when I got the briefings, they couldn't have been different. I had arrows going from Arizona back to El Paso, Arizona to Del Rio, and then different colored arrows coming over here, and all three of them were totally different. They were using different data sets, and they weren't really sure, but the graph looked really cool to them. I'm like, this is not a smoke and mirrors contest, people. We got to think about it. So let's think about what information do we have that we're currently not looking at. There were two in particular. Long story short, in a very short period of time, I said, well, if these organizations, as we now are, our hypothesis is that these organizations are operating like a business, where are they going to operate along the southwest border? And what indicators could we look for? Because even back then, individuals seeking to enter illegally between the ports of entry were not making that decision. It's true, they're making the decision to enter, but they were not making the decision where and when they were going to enter. Right? That decision was taken out of their hands years ago. Not like when you and I came in. And so we said, well, if they're going to make a business decision, like most businesses, they want to be successful, they want to minimize risk. What would, and so we started doing some red teaming. If we were going to be doing that, we would want to go to where? Path of least resistance. Well, how do we know where the path of least resistance is? And by the way, how do we know when they've made that shift from Arizona, right? So the first thing we have to figure out is when that shift is going to occur, because it doesn't happen overnight. It may happen fast, but there are leading indicators that we can really start looking and analyzing to say, I think they've started to move and they're shifting, and then try to figure out, where they're going to shift to. And so one of the things that we looked at, which we had available to us all the time in the information that we had collected but never analyzed, was recidivism. And so the extent to which individuals have been arrested more than one time. And so we took a look at, well, where across the southwest border are we seeing the lowest rate of recidivism? And so we compared, sector to sector to sector. And lo and behold, Rio Grande Valley at that time, 2010, 2011 time period, had the lowest rate of recidivism. And then it was brought to my attention, Chief, they have, they historically always get more OTMs because, here's the map. They're closest to Central America, the pathway. Mm-hmm. Because of proximity, the vast majority of their apprehensions are other than Mexican nationals. And so they're not being voluntarily returned. They're getting an A file. And so we would expect that the recidivism would be low. Matter of fact, it's been like that for years, Chief. I said, well, that makes sense. But what was the demographics of apprehensions last year from the previous year? And so we had this discussion about, take a look at the data and see what it says. Well, lo and behold, although that statement had been true for a number of years, at the time when we ran the data for the last 2 years, the percentage of other than Mexicans within the Rio Grande Valley sector was less than 30%. So it was not the overwhelming majority, but the real indicator for us that said this is where they're going, and the TCOs have already made this decision, was one of the metrics, which was average weight per seizure. And so remember, we go back to Border Patrol. I mean, when I came into Border Patrol, it was really easy. You catch more people, you seize more dope, your sector's going to get a lot more money, and the station's going to get a lot more toys. And so it was get as much as you can all the time. And that was easy for me to understand. Just continue to do it, right? No talk about outcomes versus outputs. It was just go and get as much as you can. And so when I posed a question after doing some research. I posed a question to the chiefs during one of the strategy sessions we had, and I said across the southwest border, I said, who has led the nation year after year in total seizures by tons, right? Total seizures by weight within the United States Border Patrol. Well, that was a gimme, right? Because Tucson. Had led it the whole time, and I said, okay, so. The answer to that was right. So it was Tucson last year. And I said, but who led along the southwest border, along all of the 9 Border Patrol sectors, who led in the average weight per seizure category? Then we had a discussion about what that was. And then lo and behold, there wasn't even a close second. It was Rio Grande Valley. And so we started talking about what that really meant. And then we had the discussion about the business, right? And so if a business is wants to reduce risk, increase profits, they're going to go to an area where they're beating us, and we don't know it yet. And the easy example is if I'm a plaza boss in an area, and I have a buyer, let's just say Dallas, and that buyer wants to purchase 1,000 pounds of marijuana every month. I have a business decision to make, whether I'm going to move one night, I'm going to move all 1,000 pounds, right? That's one course of action. And I can do that if I have a high probability of success because I know the operations, I know what their strength is on the Border Patrol, I know where they can go, and so because I can move a lot more product with in a very less effort, and I'm not taking very much risk. Or if I'm in an area where there's a lot of patrols, they've got the technology, my risk is a little bit higher, I want to hedge my bets, right? So I may break that load down to 100 pounds or 200 pounds because I know at some point in that month I may have to run 10 loads. They may catch 8 of them, and I can live with that, right? That's a price of doing business. But I can't lose 1,000 pounds, right? And so when you think about that at that business model, in these organizations now looking at it and operating as businesses, it really makes sense why you would then not just look at how much weight or how much narcotics was seized. And we used, and I remember when I first suggested this and we talked it through, and just about everybody said, well, Chief, what about cocaine, right? And I said, well, the measure that we're looking at has nothing to do with the seizure itself. It's just a commodity that every cartel across the southwest border is moving, right? It could be parrots.
It could be
right?
people.
It could be people. If they were moving it, so we have other indicators about, marijuana versus cocaine versus heroin. But what we're trying to do is establish and understand the business models of these organizations. And so once we looked at the recidivism rate, and then the very first one that really capped it off for us, that we thought we were onto something, was another thing that we were capturing just by the mere fact of processing individuals. And this probably overwhelmingly, along with the average weight procedure, that gave us the confidence to move forward and tell the commissioner where it was going to go next, was something which we ended up calling, for lack of a better term, first-time entrance, right? Mm-hmm. So because of a U.S. visit and force at the time, it assigned a fingerprint identification number, a unique number, right, to individuals who had not been previously entered into the system. So you can assume that they haven't been encountered by the Border Patrol or OFO at a port of entry illegally. So these are people that are coming in for the very first time. and they are being assigned a fin. Oh, and what we can do is we can look at that over time and compare and contrast first-time entrants. Because if in fact an organization is shifting from one location to the next, there should be a trend line that suggests that these first-time entrants are moving from one location to the other because a criminal organization has made a concerted effort to shift that. A shift, by the way, that operationally we may not see for months or even a year, but they've actually made that shift and they're slowly adjusting their operations. And if we don't figure that out, we're just going to be in the same position when we're overwhelmed, and now we're going to have to ring the bell, and then all the agents are going to have to then shift from one sector to the other, which we've done historically throughout my career. So the first-time entrance became really interesting, and lo and behold, again, no close second on this. Rio Grande Valley at that time, for the last couple of years, was leading the first-time entrance, and they weren't like we were talking about when you look at recidivism. They were not OTM populations where you typically would see first times coming from Central and South America. A lot of these were coming from were Mexican nationals because it wasn't the people that were making the decision, it was the organization. So once we had first time entrants trending, no close second across the southwest border, we had the average weight per seizure, no close second along the southwest border. We felt confident to say that, Commissioner, we believe we know where that the next shift is going to be. And that was, I mean, doing predictive analysis back then was very risky for a number of reasons. One is we weren't experts in it. We were just trying to make the case because nobody else in the government, because we'd asked, it was one of my priority intelligence requirements, one of the first days when I was putting that requirements package together for the intelligence community, is basically tell us, where are our threats? What capability gaps do you see? Where's the migration of those threats across the southwest border? And not hearing anything back, we said, well, let's see what we can put together for ourselves. So that really became the fundamental, and there was other metrics that really painted a mosaic for us to be able to say that which we believed, because each one of those indicators and each one of the data sets that we the dozen that we picked for the strategy, we already had pre-designated that for this specific data set, if we think we're doing good, it's going to go up. And if it doesn't go up, it is trending in the wrong direction. Doesn't mean the sky's going to fall, but it's an indicator. And each one of those, we already knew exactly how to dial and tweak everything, and then just start collecting the data and start analyzing it to be able to understand. And the briefings that I did on the Hill, and when we would do our state of the border, end of the year briefs, it was basically the function of three things. The first one was the intelligence overview, right? And that was either done when we were able to at a classified setting. If not, it was in an unclassified setting. And what we did for Congress on a quarterly basis outside of the microphones and the cameras was to really show them that there was a way to describe to the American public how we believed the border was secure, and we had hard data to show. Because absent anything that anybody else came up with in the federal government, we were going to continue to march forward to get more proficient and better at this. And quite frankly, I don't want to outsource somebody telling the Border Patrol our mission and whether we were successful or not. So we spent a lot of time on it.
So the picture that you've just painted, you think back to you came in, afterwards me and Chief Chavez, and went from an organization to where our source of intel and how we conducted operations in the field was a few people in a muster going out to the field to relieve the previous unit, and the previous unit passing on what they had seen or what the groups that they had cut. It was right there what was in front of us, and that was about it. And the adversary, as we saw it, was just, as you said, the mom and pop groups that were coming across. Fast forward to what you just described, to all the analytics and all the predictive analysis and everything that goes into a much more complex adversary, a much more complex environment, a much larger organization in the United States Border Patrol. All of this in the space of 20, 25 years. That's extremely rapid. That's extremely fast when you think government organization and how fast it takes to grow and adapt. You played a big part of that, and I'm sure you are too. I'm very curious to see 25 years from now what the Border Patrol is going to look like and what the threat's going to look like. And that's one of the great things about being here at the Academy and graduating these new agents and seeing the enthusiasm and the motivation in their eyes and knowing they're going to take this organization and they're going to make it better, which is what we want.
Sure.
So you have them right now. They're listening to you, and the men and women out in the field right now, coming from what you've just seen today and all the things that you have done. And we could talk for hours about everything that you've contributed to this organization. Any message you want to give to them?
Yeah, just to continue to push through self-fulfilling prophecies that others are going to set for them because they're quote-unquote trainees or new to the organization, or they themselves may set for themselves because this may be, like in my case, a new area. The only reason why a lot of this, and I look back as we're having this conversation, and we haven't had really an opportunity, it's kind of new territory for me, and as I'm thinking about it, I mean, the whole thing, I got a master's, back then I got, when I was assigned as a new assistant chief, I was assigned as part of the portfolio, among other things, was the budget. I was petrified. I was barely able to balance my own checkbook. Now I was being put in charge, I was put in charge of a sector's budget. And I said, and there was no course I could take. There was nobody out there. Oh, don't worry, Chief, the admin folks, are here to take care of that. And so it's not that I didn't trust them. I needed to learn and understand it. I can delegate, responsibility to do the reports. I can never delegate the accountability. And so I wasn't getting a really, let's just say, confidence in what I was seeing and where our financial condition was and where the money was going. And so it forced me. It was another forcing function in my career to go back and get my graduate degree. And at that point, to me, what made sense was an MBA because I have to understand finance. I have to understand business. It just so happened part of that 3 nights a week for 3.5 years involved advanced statistics and things that I would always shy away from, because it was an elective. Now it wasn't an elective. And then fast forward, I had the opportunity, and you talked about, well, this was a whole new way of looking at statistics and law enforcement. Yeah, but right about that same time period, who did it probably in the early 90s, was Bill Bratton in New York, right? Mm-hmm. This whole CompStat, comparative statistics. I remember, hearing about it. I didn't know anything about it. Lo and behold, he's one of the guest speakers while I was at the JFK School of Government, and that intrigued me. And I had subsequently, after I graduated that program, I started doing panel discussions with him. And then I talked with the author who was doing a book, one of the instructors at Harvard. And he came out to the field in San Diego because he was adding as a case study because it had never been done at a large, federal level. And so there were things that I couldn't have controlled that had shaped that perhaps put me in a position as these building blocks, not knowing it at the time as independent activities, put me in a position to be able to think differently about some of the things that we just discussed. But for those opportunities that I myself would have never done on my own, by the way, right? Some petrified me, right? Oh my gosh, I'm an assistant chief in the busiest sector in Tucson at the time, in 2000 and 2001, 2002. I'm barely seeing my family as it is, and I'm going to decide on my own dime, I'm going to go and get a graduate degree 3 nights a week. But going back to what I was, talking to the class about, those are decisions that you make that, at the time it was more important to me at that moment in time that I needed to really understand and do the best that I could as an assistant chief and understand the financial operations and how to be effective for the mission and for the sector and for the chief of the sector at that time to be able to move forward and there was no other way that I saw at the time than going back to school and that again in each one of those just kind of set something in motion that helped me think about things differently as I promoted in the leadership positions because let's face it, problem solving is not easy at times.
but if you can work with other people, and especially Border Patrol agents, God love us, we're just so stubborn at times, right? When it comes to, sign cutting or this and that, and trying to get them to, and you put them through the academy here, and they go out there, and people are telling them, how to drive and how to patrol and everything else, and all of a sudden, somewhere, probably at from the first to second, certainly the third line supervisors, we expect them to become leaders. And we expect them to, be visionary. We expect them to be innovative. And we expect them, are you kidding me? How do you do that? You just can't, without hurting their brain, plug them in somewhere and have them start changing something that institutionally we've told them how to think and how to do. And so that's a challenge even still today. So, and like, for you and for the other leaders, as we had those discussions, and I remember, some of those leadership discussions, whether it was the strategy or thinking through some of these, different ways to analyze data, and I know it was painful for the audience, and it was painful for me. We talked earlier about, just talking with Border Patrol agents as we did over the past day or two. It drains you mentally and physically. And each one of those sessions, it was like, man, felt like, do I have to go back there and have another one of those sessions? I don't know if I can take it. And I start, questioning, because nobody's, I'm not getting any, love or joy feedback from this group. Am I totally hosed with what I'm thinking about here? So it was a process too, and it's difficult, which is the reason why it's really hard to change an institution, because of that self-preservation, because of that comfort zone, and why it was so hard to let people know that to trust us, changing the strategy and changing apprehensions as our leading metric for GEPR and everything. It's going to work out. It's going to be okay. But that was like, it was like, you have a kid and they're by the side of the pool and you're treading water, and you put them in the water. That they know it's not going to hurt them. And you're out there saying, just jump, just trust me, right? You're okay. And they really want to do it, but there's something that's keeping their feet rooted to the side of that pool, right? And you don't know how long you're going to be able to tread water because you're in deep water. But at some point they make that jump. And when that happens at the strategic and organizational level, I'll tell you, there is no better feeling of accomplishment, in my opinion, than to see that in motion.
Chief, great career, great individual. I hope that you continue to stay in orbit around the Border Patrol and keep coming back. I know we could talk for hours about all these things. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for another episode of What's Important Now. Everybody stay safe out there. Times are tough, but it continues to get better, and we continue to evolve to the threat. Stay safe out there. Honor first.